The gravel bit into my palms through my civilian jacket, and Officer Trent Holloway's knee pressed between my shoulder blades like a branding iron. Someone on the sidewalk was filming. I could hear the shuffle of feet, a woman's sharp intake of breath, the tinny click of a phone camera, and then my military ID card skidded across the pavement and landed face up in the gutter, 2 feet from my nose. Holloway went very still. His partner's radio crackled and went silent. The silver eagle of a full colonel caught the streetlight, and in that moment, with my cheek still against the cold concrete and blood copper on my tongue, I watched a man understand exactly what he had just done. But to understand what happened after, you need to know how I ended up on that pavement in the first place, because it started 6 months earlier. It started with a city I had loved, a career I had built with 23 years of blood and sand, and a Tuesday evening in October that looked, on the surface, completely ordinary. I had moved to Clarksville, Tennessee that spring, after my assignment at the Pentagon wound down, and I was waiting on orders for my next posting. Fort Campbell sat just across the state line in Kentucky, and the city had always felt like a place I could breathe. Wide streets lined with old oaks, a farmer's market on Saturday mornings, neighborhoods where people still left their porch lights on for no particular reason. I rented a house on Dunbar Cave Road, a sensible 3-bedroom with a screened porch and a yard I never had time to tend. The kitchen smelled of cardamom coffee by 6 every morning. My neighbors knew me as Diane, not Colonel Carter, not ma'am, not the woman with the bronze star and the Pentagon parking pass. Just Diane, who left before sunrise and came home after dark and sometimes had her father over on Sundays for chess and sweet potato pie. My career was not the kind you announced at dinner parties. 23 years. 3 deployments. 2 to Iraq, 1 to Afghanistan. A tour running logistics for the 101st Airborne that aged me a decade and 13 months and gave me a recurring dream about helicopter dust and the smell of kerosene at altitude. I had a Bronze Star, a Meritorious Service Medal, and a personnel file thick enough to stop a door. At 47, I was one of the youngest full colonels in my branch. I had earned every Silver Eagle the hard way. Through desert heat, through the particular exhaustion of being the only black woman in every briefing room for most of my adult life, fighting for respect from men who confuse my silence with uncertainty and my composure with submission, I had learned, very early, to move through the world with precision. Not because I was afraid, but because I had spent 2 decades in environments where the wrong read of a situation could end in catastrophe, and that habit of careful navigation did not stop at the base gate. I ran every evening at 6:30. Same route, every time. Down Dunbar Cave, left on Providence, along the Creek Trail through Wilma Rudolph Boulevard, back through the Madison Street corridor and home. 5 miles. 43 minutes on a good day. 47 when the knee I had damaged in a Humvee rollover outside Baghdad decided to remind me it existed. I ran in a gray Fort Bragg hoodie with the hood down, black compression leggings, and the white wireless earbuds my niece Janelle had sent me for my birthday with a card that said, "I know you don't listen to music, but at least look like a person who isn't scary." She was 22 and funny and knew me well enough to know I appreciated the joke. I used the earbuds to track my pace through an app on my phone. From the outside, I looked like someone tuned out to the world. I have thought about that detail many times since. It was a Tuesday in October, one of those evenings when the air had just turned sharp enough to put color in your cheeks, and the oak leaves along the creek trail had gone rust and amber, and the smell of wet bark and cold dirt came up from the ground in clean gusts. I was on mile 3, working through a logistics problem from a briefing I'd attended that morning. Supply chain redundancy, nothing urgent, the kind of mid-level puzzle I solved instinctively while my body ran on autopilot, when I noticed the cruiser. It was pulled onto the grass shoulder of Providence Boulevard, engine idling, angled so the driver could watch the trail entrance from a diagonal. A cop parked near a trail at dusk was ordinary. I noticed it the way I noticed everything, a single measured scan, no dwelling. And I turned onto Madison Street and kept my pace. The cruiser appeared again on Madison, about 30 yards behind me, moving at a walking pace. This time, it stayed there. I felt the familiar calibration happen in my chest, the particular internal adjustment that black people who have spent their lives navigating certain kinds of spaces understand on a cellular level. Not paranoia, not fear, A reading. The way you read wind direction before you decide which ridge to cross. I kept my form. I kept my breathing even. My stride did not change. I told myself, finish the mile, get home. This is nothing. It was not nothing, and some part of me already knew it. But 23 years of command had taught me to complete the sequence in front of you before you react to the one you're anticipating. I was on the corner of Madison and Greenwood when the cruiser swung in front of me and the door opened. He was early 30s, sandy hair cut short under the brim of his cap, the kind of build that suggested he had lifted weights in high school and coasted since. The nameplate on his chest read, Holloway. He put one hand on the doorframe and the other on his belt, and he looked at me the way certain men look at a thing they have already decided about. Not with hostility exactly, but with something flat and certain that sits just behind hostility and feeds it. "Ma'am, I need you to stop right there," he said. Not a request. A sentence with a period at the end. I stopped. I removed one earbud. I said, "Good evening, officer. Is there a problem?" "We've had a report of a suspicious individual in this area. Female, black, wearing a gray hoodie." He tilted his head slightly, as if the tilt completed a logical argument. "That description matches you. The match was that I was a black woman wearing a gray hoodie in a neighborhood where I lived, in a city where I paid property taxes and had a library card and bought my groceries at the Kroger 3 blocks east." I filed this observation away and kept my voice exactly level. I had used this voice in combat briefings, in congressional hearings, in rooms full of men who needed me to stay composed so that they could afford to lose composure themselves. "I live 4 blocks from here," I said. "I run this route every evening. Can I see some ID?" "I'm on a run," I said. Plain fact, no apology. "I don't carry a wallet. I have my phone and my military ID in my jacket pocket." He looked at the jacket pocket, then at me. Something shifted in his expression. Not anger yet, but the precursor to it. The slight hardening that happens when a person's expectations meet resistance. "Step over to the vehicle, please." I stepped over to the vehicle. I was careful and I was not afraid, and I want you to understand the difference because it mattered for everything that followed. His partner was still in the passenger seat, younger than Holloway by at least 5 years, barely old enough to shave cleanly, watching from behind the windshield with eyes that moved back and forth between me and his partner with the specific uncertainty of someone who hasn't yet decided what kind of cop he intends to be. I noted him, filed him, returned my attention to Holloway. "Hands where I can see them," Holloway said. I raised both hands, slowly, palms forward. "My identification is in my left front pocket. I'm going to reach for it slowly and show it to you." I said hands where I can see them. I kept them up. "I understand that. I'm explaining to you that my military identification is in my pocket. I'd like to show it to you." "Are you resisting?" The word landed the way a certain kind of word lands. Not as language, but as physics, as a change in atmospheric pressure. I felt the adrenaline spike in my blood, hot and sudden and very old, and I pushed it back down with the same deliberate force I had used to push it down on roads outside Mosul when the wrong kind of silence fell over a checkpoint. I was not going to be the angry black woman. I was not going to give him the scene he needed. "I'm not resisting," I said with absolute steadiness. "I am cooperating and explaining my actions simultaneously. Those are not mutually exclusive." What happened next took approximately 4 seconds. He stepped forward, gripped my left wrist, turned me, and put his forearm hard across my shoulders. I had time to register the move. Army combatives, approximately level 1, sloppy execution. And I had the instinct and the training to counter it, and I did neither, because I had already run the calculation, and I understood exactly what the world does to a black woman who physically resists a white police officer on a public street, regardless of her rank, regardless of her record, regardless of every fact and evidence. So I went down. His weight came across my back. My right knee hit the concrete first, then my palms, then my cheek against the cold pavement, and I was looking at the sidewalk from 2 inches away, tasting blood from my bitten lip, and I kept my hands flat and I breathed. Someone on the sidewalk said, "Oh my God," in a voice that was both a sentence and a question. A woman's voice cut through sharply. What is he doing? She didn't do anything. The young partner had gotten out of the car. I heard his boots on the pavement, slow, hesitant, the footsteps of a man following a script he wasn't sure he believed in anymore. The radio on Holloway's belt crackled. Somewhere further up the block, a porch light came on. My jacket had twisted when I fell, the inside pocket had pulled partially open, and the military ID had come loose. I watched it lying on the pavement 2 feet from my face up, the silver eagle embossed on the laminate catching the streetlight and throwing it back in small, cold flashes. Colonel Diane A. Carter, United States Army. The photograph was from 3 years ago. I looked younger in it, before Afghanistan had finished putting gray into my hair. Holloway hadn't seen it yet. Detaining for questioning, he was telling dispatch, the radio crackling. Black female, running clothes, Madison and Greenwood. No, she's down. Copy. I kept my hands flat against the gravel. The specific texture of the pavement pressed into my palms with small, precise points of pain that I cataloged the way I cataloged everything. Calmly, completely, for later. My right knee was wet through the legging fabric. I thought, with a clarity that was almost peaceful, about 23 years. About the roadside in Fallujah in 2004, where I'd held a tourniquet on a 20-year-old from Baton Rouge named Marcus Webb for 40 minutes while we waited for medevac, talking to him about college football and his mother's cooking and the first car he was going to buy when he got home. And he had lived, and had sent me a photo of that car, a used Mustang in cherry red, from a parking lot in Louisiana 6 months later. About the briefing room at the Pentagon where I had once corrected a 2-star general's math in front of a congressional delegation, and he had, after a long pause, said, "She's right." About every room I had entered where I was not expected to be competent, and had been, relentlessly, anyway. And then I thought about the laminated card on the pavement. "Officer," I said, very quietly. The voice I used when I needed someone's full attention without raising the room temperature. He pressed the knee harder. "Don't talk." "There's a military identification card approximately 2 feet to your left," I said in exactly the same tone. "I would strongly suggest you look at it before this situation develops any further." Silence. Then the particular quality of silence that is not the absence of sound, but the presence of a man reconsidering. His weight shifted, the knee lifted. I heard him reach across, heard the small scrape of laminate on concrete. The young partner from near the car hood said very quietly, "Trent." Just the name. Nothing else. I pushed myself up off the pavement and stood. My knee was bleeding, dark through the black fabric. My palms were raw. I had spent the last 7 minutes face down on a public sidewalk in the city where I lived, and I was 47 years old and one of the senior military officers in the state of Tennessee, and I was completely, absolutely, dangerously calm. I smoothed my jacket with both hands. I turned to face Officer Trent Holloway. He was holding my identification card in both hands, the way a person holds a document they are reading more than once, because the first reading produced a result they need to verify. His face had done something complicated. The certainty was gone. In its place was the specific expression of a man watching his own understanding of the last 10 minutes perform a full reversal. The young partner stood beside the car with his cap slightly off-center and his hands at his sides, and the look of someone who has just watched a terrible mistake happen in slow motion and understood, all at once, that he is now part of it. "Colonel," he said, barely audible. His face was the color of February. Holloway looked up from the card. He looked at me. The streetlight was behind me, and I let him look. And I said nothing. And I waited. And I understood for the first time that the waiting was a weapon I'd been carrying for 23 years, without quite knowing it. He started. "I think," I said, with the absolute quiet of a woman who has just made an important and irrevocable decision, "that we need to call your watch commander, right now. Don't you agree?" Sergeant Dale Mitchell arrived 12 minutes later in a second cruiser, and I used those 12 minutes to stand exactly where I was on the sidewalk corner, hands at my sides, and watch Holloway try to reassemble his confidence the way a man tries to reassemble a broken plate, pressing the pieces together and hoping nobody notices the seams. His partner, whose nameplate read Istesh, had moved to the far side of the cruiser and was doing something intensive with his radio that was mostly an excuse not to look at either of us. A small crowd had gathered on the opposite sidewalk. 3 people had phones out. One woman, middle-aged, white, in a canvas jacket, the kind of woman who ran the neighborhood association and knew the names of everyone's dogs, was talking quietly into her phone with her eyes fixed on me and the expression of someone filing information away for later use. I noted all of this. I noted it the way I'd been trained to note terrain. Mitchell was heavyset, mid-50s, with the slow, deliberate movements of a man who had been doing this job long enough to recognize a problem before he was told what it was. He got out of the cruiser, looked at Holloway, looked at me, looked at my knee, and his expression did something brief and complicated that he shut down before it fully formed. "Sergeant," I said, "my name is Colonel Diane Carter, United States Army. Your officer detained me during an evening run, placed me face down on the pavement, and I sustained injuries to my right knee and both palms in the process. I have witnesses and, I believe, at least 3 video recordings of the incident. I'd like to know how you would like to proceed." Mitchell looked at Holloway. Holloway opened his mouth. "Sarge, she matched a description. She was being uncooperative. She's a full colonel, Trent," Mitchell said very quietly. "Not in front of the crowd. The way you speak to someone whose mistake you understand is going to outlast the both of you. I didn't see the ID until I know when you saw it." Mitchell turned back to me. He had the look of a man doing math he didn't like the sum of. "Colonel Carter, I apologize for this. I'd like to take a statement from you, and I'd like to get you medical attention for those injuries." "I don't need medical attention," I said. "I need your officer's badge number, your department complaint number, and the name of your chief of police. And I need the contact for your internal affairs division." The woman in the canvas jacket on the other side of the street said something to the person next to her, and they both looked at Holloway, and Holloway stared at the ground. I did not feel satisfaction at this. I want to be honest about that. What I felt was a cold, clear anger that had been burning steadily since the moment his knee hit my back, and I was managing it the way I managed everything, with precision and patience, because I intended for it to do something useful. I called my attorney from the sidewalk right there, while Mitchell was still writing in his notebook. Her name was Patricia Osei, Patty, a former Army JAG lawyer who had transitioned to civilian practice in Nashville 10 years earlier and was now one of the sharpest civil rights litigators in the state. We had served together briefly at Fort Bragg in 2009, and she was one of maybe 4 people on earth I trusted to be both brilliant and ruthless simultaneously. She picked up on the second ring. "Patty," I said, "I need you to know something before you hear it somewhere else. I was just detained and placed on the ground by a Clarksville PD officer during my evening run. I'm currently standing at Madison and Greenwood with the sergeant and 2 officers. My knee is bleeding. There are witnesses and video." There was a pause of approximately 3 seconds. Then Patty said, with the exact quiet of a woman calculating the load-bearing capacity of a bridge before she steps onto it, "Are you physically all right?" "I'm fine. Don't give a statement tonight. Not to Mitchell. Not to anyone." "I know. Go home. Ice the knee. Write everything down while it's fresh. Times, sequence, exact words, everything. And Diane?" A pause. "Don't delete any of this from your body. The knee, the palms. I'm going to need photographs before it heals." "Already ahead of you," I said, and I looked at Holloway when I said it. And he heard me. I took Mitchell's card, gave nothing beyond my name and contact information, and walked the 4 blocks home in the dark with my palms still stinging and my right knee pulling with each step. The porch light was on, the timer I had set before my run. I sat down on the front steps, and for the first time since Holloway's cruiser had cut me off, I allowed myself to be alone with what had happened. My hands were shaking slightly. I noticed this, the way I noticed the injured knee. As information, I pressed them flat against my thighs and looked at the amber leaves in the gutter, and I thought about the 20-year-old version of myself who had shown up at basic training in Georgia in 1999 and had been told, in various explicit and polite and institutional ways, that she was going to have to work twice as hard as everyone else and smile while she did it. I had done that. I had done it for 23 years. And tonight, in a gray hoodie in my own neighborhood, it had not been enough. The Pavement had not checked my service record. I went inside and took photographs of my knee and both palms in the bathroom light. Then I made coffee, sat down at the kitchen table, and wrote 4 pages of notes in my best staff officer handwriting. Timeline, sequence, exact quotes, names, badge numbers, the plate number on the cruiser, description of the crowd, description of the phone's recording. I was thorough the way I had been thorough my whole career, which is to say, completely. When I was finished, I poured a second cup and called my father. He was 71, a retired Army Master Sergeant who had served in Vietnam and come home to a country that was not glad to see him, and he had raised me on the specific combination of pride and caution that black military families pass down like a second uniform. He picked up on the first ring because he always did, and I told him what had happened without softening it, because he would not have wanted me to. There was a silence when I finished. Then he said, "You all right, baby?" "I'm fine, Dad." "You going to do something about it?" I looked at my notes on the kitchen table, 4 pages in my handwriting, every word a fact, every fact a brick. "Yeah," I said. "I'm going to do something about it." "Good," he said, and I could hear him settle in his chair the way he settled when he was finished talking and satisfied. "That's my girl." I stayed up until 2 in the morning. Not from insomnia. I had slept through artillery in a forward operating base in Kandahar province, and one difficult evening was not going to disrupt my circadian rhythm, but because there was work to do. I searched the Clarksville PD public records. I found Officer Trent Holloway's name in 2 prior excessive force complaints, both dismissed at the departmental review level, both involving black residents. I found a 2021 incident report from the same sector of Madison Street describing what the complainant called a pattern of racially targeted pedestrian stops. I printed everything. I added it to the folder. I labeled the folder with the date, the time, and the address, the way I labeled every operational file, and I set it on the kitchen table where the coffee cups had been. Then I called Patricia Osei back at 11:30 at night, which I knew she would forgive, and read her the complaint numbers. There was a longer pause this time. "Diane," Patty said, "I want you to understand something. What you have here is not a complaint. What you have here is a case." The next 48 hours moved the way things move when a story has momentum. Quickly, and in a direction nobody had initially planned. The video from the woman in the canvas jacket, whose name turned out to be Susan Carver, and who was indeed on the Neighborhood Association board, was posted to her Facebook page at 10:30 Tuesday night, with the caption, "This happened on Madison Street tonight." She was out for an evening run, that's all. It had 11,000 shares by Wednesday morning. By noon, 3 local news stations had picked it up. By Wednesday evening, it was national. I did not post anything. I did not speak to a single journalist. I went to the base, attended my morning briefings, and watched my phone receive call after call from numbers I didn't recognize, all of which I declined, and one call from a number I recognized immediately. Brigadier General William Tarkington, my immediate superior at Fort Campbell, who opened with, "Diane, I just saw the news. Tell me what happened." I told him. He listened without interrupting, which was one of the things I had always respected about Tarkington. When I finished, he said, "You have my full support. Whatever you need, use my name." "I may need to, sir." "Thank you." "Don't thank me. You shouldn't need my name." A beat of silence. "But you have it." The twist came on Wednesday afternoon, and it was the kind of twist that does not simply add to what you know, but reorganizes the entire foundation of it. Patty called me at 3 o'clock, her voice carrying the specific precision of someone who has just found the exact load-bearing wall they needed. "The suspicious person call?" she said. "The one Holloway cited when he stopped you?" "Yes. I requested the dispatch logs this morning." She paused, and in the pause I could hear the quality of a woman who has learned to let silence do the work. "Diane, there was no call. There is no record of any suspicious person reported at that location, at that time, matching your description." "The call," does not exist. I held the phone and let what she had said find its full weight. Not surprise. I had considered the possibility during my 4 pages of notes at 2 in the morning, had filed it as a hypothesis requiring verification, but the confirmation was different from the suspicion. It was a different object in my hands. I thought about Holloway on the corner, tilting his head at me. That description matches you. I thought about the cruiser on Providence Boulevard before that. Engine idling, watching the trail entrance, positioned to observe. He hadn't been responding to a call. He had been driving his sector, had seen a black woman running through a neighborhood that did not, in his assessment, belong to her, and had decided. And then he had invented the paperwork to justify what he had already decided to do. So he fabricated it, I said. It appears so. And here is the thing, Patty said. Making a false radio report is a departmental violation, which means this is no longer only excessive force, it's fabrication of the legal basis for detention. That changes the filing significantly. I set the phone down on my desk for a moment and looked out the window at the parade ground. The flag above the pole snapped in the October wind, clean and sharp against the pale sky. I had looked at flags like that all my adult life, in training, in deployment, on bases in 3 countries, and they had always meant something specific and precise to me. I thought about Marcus Webb's cherry red Mustang in a Louisiana parking lot. I thought about the 2-star general who had said, after a long pause, "She's right." Then I picked the phone back up. "File everything," I said. "File all of it." The press conference was Patty's idea, though she let me believe it was mine, which is one of the reasons I trusted her. We held it on Friday morning, outside Clarksville City Hall, in my Class A service uniform. Silver eagles on the collar, medals in order, shoes that caught the light. I had pressed the uniform myself the night before, standing at the ironing board in my kitchen at midnight, running the iron along each crease with the same care I had applied to every detail of my career for 23 years. The ritual of it steadied me, crease by crease, deliberate and precise. My father drove up from Nashville and stood to my left in his own uniform. Retired Army, Master Sergeant's chevrons, Vietnam service ribbon, because he had asked if he could come, and I had said yes, without hesitation, because standing beside him, I felt the full, vertical weight of what we were both made of. Patty stood to my right with a legal folder and an expression that contained all the warmth of a circuit breaker about to trip. There were 11 cameras, 2 national outlets, 3 local stations, a reporter from the Associated Press. Chief Margaret Holt stood at the edge of the crowd with her hands clasped and the look of a woman who had spent 48 hours inside a situation she did not design and could not fully contain. Holloway was not present. His union representative stood in the back row with the defensive posture of a man who understood that the ground had already shifted beneath him and was hoping the shift would stop before it reached his feet. I read my statement in 4 minutes. I'd written it myself, without Patty's edits, which she had reviewed and returned with the comment, "It's exactly right. Don't change a word." I stated the facts, the date, the time, the location, what Holloway had said and what I had said and what he had done, the injuries, the fabricated dispatch call, the 2 prior complaints. I stated that I was filing a formal civil rights complaint with the Department of Justice and a civil suit against Officer Holloway and the Clarksville Police Department. I stated that I had served this country for 23 years and that what happened on Madison and Greenwood was not an anomaly. It was a pattern, and that patterns could be documented, and that documented patterns had consequences. Then I stopped reading and looked up from the paper and looked directly at the cameras. "I want to be clear," I said without notes. "I am not doing this because I am a colonel. I'm doing this because I am a citizen. My rank is not what made what happened to me wrong. It was wrong on the pavement before Officer Holloway saw my identification. It will remain wrong after this case is resolved. What I am asking for has nothing to do with my medal count." The AP reporter asked Holloway's union representative whether the department stood by the officer's conduct. There was a pause of approximately 4 seconds. Then the representative said the matter was under internal review. It was the most expensive 4-second pause in Trent Holloway's career. Officer Estes, the young partner, the one with the uncertain footsteps, came to see me before the departmental hearing. He sat across from Patty and me in a conference room, with his hands in his lap, and the look of someone carrying something he had been carrying alone for too long. He said he had been informally documenting Holloway's conduct for months, the patterns he'd noticed, the stops that didn't match the calls, the way certain people got treated differently, and that he had not known what to do with what he'd written. He pulled a folded envelope from his jacket and slid it across the table. 7 pages of handwritten notes. Patty used 5 of them. I thanked him. He nodded and looked at his hands. I should have said something sooner, he said. Yes, I said without softening it. But you said it now. The departmental hearing was 6 weeks after the incident. Patty submitted the dispatch logs, 4 video recordings from 4 different angles, the medical photographs of my injuries, the 2 reopened prior complaints, a letter from Brigadier General Tarkington, and a letter from a United States Senator from Tennessee who had served 2 tours in the Marine Corps and who had called my cell phone personally upon seeing the news coverage and said, in the direct way of men from Eastern Tennessee who have seen real things, "What do you need from me, Colonel?" To which I had answered honestly, and he had delivered exactly what I asked. Holloway was terminated on a Tuesday in November. The fabrication of the dispatch call constituted departmental fraud. Chief Holt issued a public statement announcing mandatory use of force retraining for the entire department and the formation of an independent review panel for civilian complaints. The union challenged the termination. The challenge was withdrawn 6 weeks later, when Patty filed the additional documentation from Estes's notes. Holloway, who had spent 12 years on the Clarksville police force, spent the following winter looking for work. His record was public. His termination was documented. The jobs he applied for in law enforcement in 3 different counties did not call him back. I know this because Patty kept me informed, and I am telling you because you should know. The pavement runs in both directions, and gravity is indifferent to who is standing on it. The civil suit settled the following spring. The figure is a matter of public record, and I will not repeat it here, but I will tell you what I did with a portion of it. I established a scholarship fund at Tennessee State University for black women pursuing careers in public service. Law, medicine, military service, civic leadership, any path that leads toward the rooms where decisions are made. I named the scholarship for no one famous. I named it for myself at 22, standing in the Georgia heat in 1999, being told that the math was against her. The math was not against her. The math was simply someone else's, and she learned to do her own. I was sitting on my porch on a Sunday morning in March when my father called. The yard had finally gotten some attention. I'd hired a neighbor's teenager to help with the beds along the fence, and they were coming back, cautious green shoots testing the March air. The cardamom coffee was still hot from the kitchen. A cardinal sat in the oak tree at the edge of the property, red as a stoplight against the bare branches, doing absolutely nothing in particular, which is something I have come to appreciate enormously. I saw the article, my father said. The one in the Sunday paper. Yeah? They spelled your name right this time. I laughed. The ease of it surprised me. Not the laughter itself, but how light it felt. They did, Dad. You done good, baby. I looked at the cardinal. It lifted off the branch and disappeared into the pale March sky, clean and sudden, the way a decision feels when you finally know it was right. I know, I said. I think I finally do. The coffee was still hot when I carried it back to the porch. I sat in the morning light with both hands wrapped around the mug, and I looked at the quiet street and the first green along the fence and the steps where I had sat bleeding in October, which were just steps now, just wood and morning sun, and thought about the 5 miles I'd run that morning. Same route. Down Dunbar Cave, left on Providence, along the creek trail, back through Madison Street. My pace was 41 minutes flat. The knee held. No cruiser on the shoulder of Providence Boulevard. Just the trail and the cold air and the particular silence that belongs entirely to a person who is no longer carrying anything that isn't hers.